The prairie wind carried echoes of a life that once was whispering through the tall grass where Clarissa poured her, knelt beside the wooden cross marking her husband's final resting place. The sunset painted the Montana sky in strokes of amber and crimson as she spread her woolen blanket over the fresh dirt mound, her slender fingers tracing the carved name that had once meant everything to her world Montana territory, 1876. Clarissa had been a widow for exactly 2 weeks. At 26, she found herself alone on a homestead 3 miles from the nearest neighbor with winter approaching and supplies dwindling. But tonight, as she had every night since they'd laid Thomas to rest, she couldn't bring herself to return to their empty cabin. "I miss you," she whispered, arranging her shawl around her shoulders as the evening chills settled in. "The cabin feels like a ghost without you." She'd married Thomas Porter 5 years ago, following him west from Pennsylvania, with dreams of building something that belonged to them. They'd worked the land together, raised a small herd of cattle, and planned for children that never came. Then the fever took him, swift and merciless as a prairie fire. Clarissa settled onto her blanket, resting her head near the wooden cross. The stars began to emerge in the darkening sky as she closed her eyes, finding comfort in the proximity to what remained of the man she'd loved. Sleep came eventually, as it always did out here, fitful and haunted by memories. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. Startled awake, Clarissa scrambled to her knees, heart pounding against her ribs as a dark silhouette on horseback materialized against the night sky. "Madam," a deep voice called out, concern evident in its tone. "You all ride out here." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. As he approached, moonlight revealed a tall man with broad shoulders, dusty clothes, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. "I'm fine," Clarissa replied, her voice brittle, "just visiting my husband." The stranger paused, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. In the silver moonlight, she could make out weathered features, a strong jawline covered in stubble and eyes that held a quiet intensity. "Weston Farley," he introduced himself simply. "I've been riding fence for the Blackwater Ranch south of here. Spotted your lantern from the ridge." Clarissa stood, drawing her shawl tighter. Clarissa poured her, "This is my homestead." Weston glanced at the grave, then back to her. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You've been out here all night, madam." She lifted her chin. "It's not your concern, Mr. Farley. It'll be below freezing before morning," he observed, not unkindly. His hands moved to the buttons of his long canvas coat. No one should be sleeping out in the open tonight. Before Clarissa could protest, he shrugged out of his coat and stepped forward, draping it gently over her shoulders. The weight of it was substantial, still warm from his body, smelling of leather horses and pine smoke. "I can't take your... I've got layers," he interrupted, gesturing to his wool shirt and vest. "And my horse keeps me warm enough on the ride back." The unexpected kindness from this stranger loosened something tight in Clarissa's chest. She clutched the edges of the coat, suddenly aware of how cold she'd been. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Mrs. Porter, Weston said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your husband wouldn't want that." Tears burned behind Clarissa's eyes. "I don't know how to be in that cabin without him." Weston stood quietly, respectful of her grief. Finally, he said, "I lost my brother 2 years back. For months, I couldn't look at his empty bunk without feeling like I was drowning." "Does it get easier?" she asked, the question barely audible. "Different," he answered truthfully. "Not easier, just different." Weston whistled softly, and his horse, a large chestnut gelding, ambled over. "Let me see you home safe, Mrs. Porter, then I'll be on my way." Clarissa hesitated, but the practicality of his offer was undeniable. The night was growing colder, and the coyotes had begun their eerie chorus in the distance. With a last glance at Thomas's grave, she nodded. The ride to her cabin was short but silent. Weston helped her down from his horse with steady hands, then lingered only long enough to ensure her door was secure. "Keep the coat," he said when she attempted to return it. "I'll collect it another time." Before she could argue, he was back in the saddle, tipping his hat. "Good night, Mrs. Porter. You're stronger than you think." She watched him ride away until the darkness swallowed his silhouette. The oversized coat still wrapped around her, like armor against the loneliness. When Clarissa awoke the next morning, She half expected to find the coat gone, a dream conjured by her grief-addled mind. But there it was, draped over her chair, where she'd placed it the night before. Real and tangible proof that someone had seen her at her most vulnerable and offered kindness rather than judgment. The day passed in the routine chores that kept her alive, feeding the chickens, milking her cow, checking the garden that was yielding its final harvest before winter. She'd need to make decisions soon about whether to try maintaining the homestead alone or sell what she could and return east to her sister's home in Pennsylvania. As twilight approached, Clarissa found herself staring at the coat, fingers tracing the worn edges of its pockets. Something inside crinkled beneath her touch. Curious, she reached in and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a map with neat handwriting marking the distance between her homestead and what must be the Blackwater Ranch. A message was scrawled across the bottom. If you need anything, WF. That night, for the first time since Thomas died, Clarissa slept in their bed instead of beside his grave. The coat spread over her quilt like a promise. 3 days later, a supply wagon appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust along the rutted trail to her cabin. Clarissa shaded her eyes against the late morning sun, recognizing the rider as he drew closer west, and Farley, his broad shoulders unmistakable even at a distance. She met him at the edge of her yard, wiping flour-covered hands on her apron. "Mr. Farley, Mrs. Porter." He nodded. Reining his team to a halt, was passing through to town, thought I'd check if you needed anything. His eyes took in the split wood stacked neatly by the cabin. The mended chicken coop, the garden with its rows of harvested corn stalks. Approval flickered across his face. "I'm managing," Clarissa said, a note of pride in her voice. "I can see that." Something in his tone made her stand a little straighter. "Still, winters coming early this year brought some extra provision if you'll accept them." Clarissa hesitated, torn between necessity and pride. "I can't pay you, Mr. Farley, not asking for payment." He jumped down from the wagon seat. "Consider it neighborly where hardly neighbors your ranch must be. 20 miles south." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, close enough in these parts. Together they unloaded the supplies: flour, coffee, sugar, salt, pork, ammunition for the rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot. Weston worked efficiently, asking no personal questions, respecting the boundaries of her grief. When they finished, Clarissa insisted on offering him coffee and fresh bread. They sat on the porch, the autumn sun warming the wooden planks beneath them. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, cradling her tin mug. Weston considered her question, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "My mother was widowed young, with 3 boys to raise. People helped when they could," he shrugged. "That's all." "Your coat," Clarissa remembered, suddenly rising. "Let me get it for you. Keep it a while longer," he said. "I've got another." Before leaving, Weston repaired her leaking roof and fixed the broken hinge on the barn door, tasks that would have taken Clarissa days to complete on her own. He declined her thanks with a modest nod. "I'll check back before the first snow," he promised, gathering his reins. "If that's all right." Clarissa found herself nodding. Yes, that would be fine. As his wagon disappeared down the trail, she realized she had spent hours without thinking of Thomas's grave. The guilt hit her immediately, followed by a strange relief that frightened her even more. Over the following weeks, Clarissa gradually established a new rhythm to her days. Each morning, she visited Thomas's grave, speaking to him about her plans, seeking guidance. She knew wouldn't come, but finding comfort in the ritual. Each evening, she returned to the cabin, wrapped in Weston's coat, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset. True to his word, Weston returned before the first snowfall, helping her prepare the homestead for winter's harsh embrace. He taught her how to set traps for rabbits, reinforced the barn walls against wind, and showed her how to identify which cattle might not survive the winter, so she could make difficult decisions about slaughtering for meat. Their interactions remained respectful, careful, a widow, and a solitary cowboy finding unexpected companionship in practical matters. If his visits grew more frequent as November deepened toward December, neither acknowledged the pattern forming between them. The first blizzard of winter struck suddenly in early December, howling down from the mountains with a vengeance that pinned Clarissa inside her cabin for 3 days. When the storm finally passed, she emerged to find drifts taller than herself surrounding the property. It took her most of a day to dig pathways to the barn and the chicken coop. Exhausted, she trudged back to the cabin as darkness fell. only to hear the distant sound of hoofbeats struggling through snow. Clarissa's heart leapt before she could temper it. Weston appeared over the ridge, leading his horse through the deep snow, his face lined with concern that melted into visible relief when he spotted her. "Thank God," he called out, quickening his pace. "Wasn't sure you'd weathered the storm all right." "It takes more than snow to defeat a porter," she replied, surprising herself with the lightness in her voice. That night, with another storm threatening, Clarissa insisted Weston couldn't safely return to the ranch. She prepared the small storage room with blankets, offering him shelter until the weather cleared. They shared a simple supper of rabbit stew and biscuits, their conversation flowing more easily than ever before. Weston spoke of his years working cattle drives from Texas, of the 2 years he'd spent mining in Colorado before settling at Blackwater Ranch. Clarissa found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, of meeting Thomas at a church social, of their journey west. "He was a good man," she said softly, speaking of Thomas without tears for the first time. "He loved this land, said it had a spirit that spoke to him." Weston nodded. "Some places grab hold of your soul and don't let go." "Is that why you stayed at Blackwater? Did it grab your soul?" His eyes met hers across the table, something like that. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities that neither was ready to acknowledge. Clarissa looked away, first rising to clear their plates. "You still wear it," Weston observed, nodding toward his coat hanging by the door. "It's warm," Clarissa replied simply, though they both knew there was more to it than that. The second storm kept Weston at the homestead for 2 more days. They fell into an easy partnership, he chopping wood and tending to the livestock while she cooked and mended his torn shirt. In the evenings, he taught her to play checkers with pieces carved from firewood. When the skies finally cleared, Clarissa felt a hollowness at the thought of his departure. Standing at the door as he prepared to leave, she finally returned his coat, pressing it into his hands. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the borrowed garment. Weston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll be back to check on you after Christmas." "I'll be here," she promised. Christmas passed quietly, with Clarissa marking the day by placing evergreen branches on Thomas's snow-covered grave. "I'm learning to live again," she told him, her breath clouding in the frigid air. "I think you'd want that for me." The day after New Year's 1877 brought Weston back to her door with a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Late Christmas gift," he explained awkwardly. "Nothing fancy." Inside was a hand-carved wooden box with wildflowers etched into the lid, "for keepsakes," he said. "Or whatever you might need it for." Tears pricked Clarissa's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I have nothing for you. Didn't expect anything," Weston assured her. "Just wanted you to have it." That evening, as snow fell gently outside, Clarissa took out Thomas's letters from their hiding place in her Bible. She read each one a final time, then carefully placed them in Weston's carved box. It felt like a ceremony, honoring what had been while making space for what might come. Winter's grip on the territory was relentless that year. February brought another massive blizzard that isolated homesteaders for weeks. When Weston appeared at Clarissa's door in early March, gaunt and weary from fighting to keep cattle alive through the worst of it, she pulled him inside without hesitation. "You look half frozen," she chided, pushing him toward the chair closest to the fire. "Half the herd didn't make it," he said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "We've been digging carcasses out of snowdrifts for days." Clarissa placed a steaming cup of coffee in his hands, her fingers brushing his. "You need rest, Weston." It was the first time she'd used his given name. The sound of it seemed to reach something inside him, and his shoulders sagged as the tension he'd been carrying began to dissolve. He stayed the night, too tired to make the journey back to the ranch. In the morning, Clarissa found him repairing her broken plow before dawn, as if compelled to be useful, even in his exhaustion. "The ranch owner?" she asked as they shared breakfast. "He treats you well?" Weston's expression shifted, something unreadable passing across his features. "Well enough. Will you stay there after the winter, I mean?" He studied her face before answering. "Been thinking it might be time for a change." The words hung between them, pregnant with possibility. As spring slowly awakened the land, Clarissa found herself watching the horizon more often, her heart quickening at the sight of a rider approaching. Weston's visits had become a cherished constant in her life, though neither of them had put words to the feelings growing between them. On a mild April day, Clarissa was tending her newly planted garden when the thunder of multiple horses caught her attention. She stood, shading her eyes against the sun, her stomach nodding when she saw 4 riders approaching. None of them Western. The men reined to a stop at her fence line, their expressions ranging from curious to calculating. The leader, a heavy-set man with a silver-streaked beard, removed his hat. "Mrs. Porter," he called out. "I'm Samuel Blackwood, owner of Blackwater Ranch." Clarissa approached cautiously, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Blackwood, what brings you to my homestead? Looking for my foreman," he replied, his tone conversational, though his eyes remained cold. "Weston Farley seems he's been spending considerable time in these parts. Mr. Farley has been kind enough to help me since my husband's passing." Clarissa answered carefully, "I'm grateful for his assistance." Blackwood's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. "I imagine so pretty widow all alone." He let the implication hang in the air. Heat flushed Clarissa's cheeks. "Your insinuation is inappropriate, sir." "No offense meant," Blackwood said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just concerned about my foreman's divided attentions. We've lost too many head this winter to have him gallivanting about." One of the other riders leaned toward Blackwood. "That's his horse in the barn, boss." Clarissa's heart raced. Weston had arrived earlier to help her mend fences, intending to finish before returning to the ranch. "Tell Farley when he returns that I expect him back at Blackwater by sundown," Blackwood instructed, "or he can collect his wages and find employment elsewhere." As the men turned to leave, the sound of approaching footsteps made them pause. Weston emerged from behind the barn, hammer still in hand, his expression hardening when he saw the visitors. "Mr. Blackwood," he acknowledged, moving to stand beside Clarissa. "Something I can help you with?" The ranch owner's eyes narrowed at the protective stance Weston had taken. "Time to choose Farley the rancher, whatever this is." "I've given Blackwater Ranch 8 years of my life," Weston replied evenly. "I've earned the right to spend my free time as I see fit." "Free time is one thing, neglecting your duties is another." "I've never neglected my responsibilities." Blackwood snorted. "The men to say different say you've been distracted these past months." Tension crackled in the air as the 2 men stared each other down. Finally, Weston spoke, his voice steady and resolute. "Then perhaps it's time I collected those wages you mentioned." Blackwood's face flushed with anger. "You're choosing this widow's dirt farm over your position." "I'm choosing my own path," Weston corrected for the first time in years. The confrontation ended with Blackwood promising to send Weston's belongings in final pay with one of the ranch hands. As the riders disappeared down the trail, Clarissa turned to Weston, her expression troubled. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "Not for me. Wasn't just for you." Weston replied, looking out over the homestead. "Been saving to buy my own place for years. Blackwood's never going to sell me the parcel he promised." "But where will you go now?" Weston met her gaze directly. "That depends." On what Clarissa asked, though she already knew the answer on whether you might consider taking on a partner for this place. The word partner hung between them, its meaning deliberately ambiguous. "This land needs more than one pair of hands," Clarissa admitted softly. "But I won't be anyone's charity case, Weston." "Never thought of you that way," he assured her. "Never could." That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The air between them had changed, charged with unspoken feelings and the weight of decisions yet to be made. "I still love him," Clarissa said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll always love Thomas." Weston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I wouldn't expect otherwise. But I've learned that my heart has room for more than grief." She turned to face him fully. "It has room for a future I never imagined." Slowly giving her time to pull away if she wanted, Weston reached for her hand. His calloused fingers entwined with hers, strong and steady. "I don't need answers tonight," he said. "Just wanted you to know where I stand." Clarissa squeezed his hand in response. "Stay," she said simply. "Help me build something here. We can figure out the rest as we go." Spring blossomed into summer, and with it the homestead flourished under their combined care. Weston moved into the storage room, maintaining a respectful distance while they navigated the delicate evolution of their relationship. Together, they repaired fences, expanded the garden, and added 6 new calves to their small herd. Word spread through the territory about the widow and the former ranch foreman working the Porter homestead together. Some neighbors raised eyebrows at the arrangement, but most recognized the practical necessity of partnership in the unforgiving Western landscape. On a warm evening in late July, Clarissa found Weston standing beside Thomas's grave, hat in hand, his expression solemn. She approached quietly, curious, but not wanting to intrude on their private moment. "I was asking his blessing," Weston explained, without turning, somehow sensing her presence behind him. Might seem foolish, but it felt right. Clarissa moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing against his arm. "What did he say?" A small smile touched Weston's lips. "He said I'd better treat you right, or he'd haunt me till my dying day." "That sounds like Thomas," Clarissa replied, her own smile bittersweet. "He always was protective." Weston turned to face her, his expression earnest. "I meant what I said about being partners, Clarissa, but I need you to know that I've grown to care for you as more than that." The setting sun cast golden light across his features, highlighting the vulnerability in his eyes. Clarissa reached up, her fingers lightly touching his cheek. "I know," she whispered. "I felt the same." "We can take all the time you need," he assured her. "There's no hurry." But Clarissa had spent months thinking about this moment. "I've had enough of waiting for life to happen, Weston. Thomas taught me that tomorrow isn't promised to anyone." She stepped closer, her hand still resting against his face. "I want to live fully again with you." Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened into something more certain. When they finally parted, Weston rested his forehead against hers, his breath uneven. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not to make this proper in others' eyes, but because I want to build a life with you, Clarissa Porter. A real life with all its joys and sorrows." Tears glistened in her eyes as she nodded. Yes. They were married by a traveling preacher in early September, with neighboring homesteaders gathering to witness the union. Clarissa wore a blue dress she'd sewn herself with wildflowers in her hair. Weston stood tall beside her in a new shirt, his voice steady as he spoke his vows. That night, as Clarissa settled into their now shared bed, Weston draped his coat over her shoulders, the same coat he'd covered her with beside Thomas' grave nearly a year before. "You kept it all this time," she observed, running her fingers over the worn fabric. "Seemed right to return it today," he said, sitting beside her. Full circle in a way, Clarissa leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she'd once thought impossible. "I never expected to find love again." "Neither did I," Weston admitted, his arm encircling her waist. "Never thought I was meant for it at all." And now his answer came in the form of a kiss that spoke of promises kept and a future embraced. Winter came again to the Montana territory, but this year Clarissa faced it without fear. The cabin that had once felt empty now overflowed with shared laughter, quiet conversations, and the warmth of new beginnings. On Christmas morning 1877, Clarissa placed a small package in Weston's hands. He unwrapped it carefully to find a hand-knitted baby's blanket, soft and white, against his weathered palms. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're certain?" Clarissa nodded, joy illuminating her face. "The baby should arrive by summer's end." Weston gathered her in his arms, his happiness too great for words. Later that day, they visited Thomas's grave together, Clarissa placing evergreen branches while Weston stood respectfully beside her. "He would be happy for us," Clarissa said with certainty, "for all three of us." As they walked back to the cabin, snow beginning to fall in gentle flakes around them, Weston draped his coat over Clarissa's shoulders. It was a gesture that had once been born of simple kindness, but had grown to symbolize so much more: protection, partnership, and a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of circumstances. Their daughter, Elizabeth Thomas Farley, was born on a golden August afternoon in 1878. Her tiny fingers clutching at the world with the same determination her parents had shown in building their life together. Neighbors celebrated the birth, bringing gifts and good wishes for the child who represented new hope for the Porter Farley homestead. As autumn painted the landscape in brilliant hues once more, Clarissa stood on the porch with Elizabeth nestled against her chest, watching Weston work in the field they'd expanded that spring. The homestead had grown to a new room added to the cabin, more cattle grazing the pasture's apple saplings, beginning to take root in the orchard they'd planted. "Your father was right about this land," she whispered to her daughter, gazing out at the beauty surrounding them. "It does have a spirit that speaks to you if you're willing to listen." Weston looked up from his work, raising his hand in greeting when he spotted them. His smile, so rare when they'd first met, now came easily and often. Clarissa waved back her heart full. She had loved and lost and found the courage to love again. The grave that had once been her only solace was now a cherished memorial, visited with flowers rather than tears. And the cowboy who had covered her with his coat on that cold autumn night continued to shelter her with his steady presence, his unwavering strength, and a love that had saved them both from the loneliness of the vast western frontier.